but
All right, we're back in
mixed reviews.
All right, so I think I heard Todd say we're holding off on executive session motions until the
end of the
trial, or not the trial.
To the special call meeting in the
Special call
afternoon.
meeting tonight. Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's what Todd said.
Well, no,
That's what the agenda says.
That's the way the
SEC,
agenda
okay.
Wait a minute.
Okay. I think Reverend Mack may have said something.
That's because you have some other items on the special call meeting that you've not heard yet.
I'm perfectly good. All right, so Priscilla's pulling this up. Reverend Mack, did you want to make a statement just to kind of share on the feeling of the board?
Who's coming up?
All right, who's first on
This
it?
is special ed.
Special ed.
Debrief.
Debrief on program review for special education. Dr. Bowman.
Yeah, so we don't have that.
That's correct. Oh, no, this is.
Let me give you the hammer.
You can make it go quickly by not asking questions. I said you make it go quickly by not asking questions.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And before we get started, I'd like to ask a few staff members in the audience to stand up. I'd like to first start with Lisa Allison. You've met Miss Allison earlier in the year, and she helped with a presentation on dyslexia. She transitioned into the position that's going to track interventions. She'll be tracking reading and math interventions for students, kindergarten up through grade 12. So she'll be working to progress monitor that. She transitioned out of the Department of Alternative Programs, and we're just delighted. The reason I had her stand this afternoon is she's been a lead, one of two leads, working with Dr. Hatchett when he was in the district. Dr. Hatchett worked with the special education department. He worked with the curriculum and instruction folks. He worked with principals. He worked with teachers. But Miss Allison was the person, or one of the two people, that always made sure that she got him where he needed to be. So thanks, Miss Allison. The other individual that helped co-lead that work was Deanna Parrish. Deanna Parrish has left Charleston County School District to take a position in another district. So she's not with us here this afternoon, but she too was very instrumental in Dr. Hatchett's work. The third person I'd like to reference is Madeline Jacobs. Madeline also made sure that Dr. Hatchett had access. You know Madeline. You also know that she's transitioning as her husband takes a job in another state. She'll be relocated and leaving us. But she made sure that Dr. Hatchett had access to the people he needed to meet with. She was very eager to hear what his findings were, and she's been instrumental for us moving forward in preparing this report today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hatchett, and he's going to talk about the program review he did for our special education programs in Charleston County School District.
I just want to say that Lisa and Deanna were excellent Uber drivers, making sure that I was where I was supposed to be when I was supposed to be there. Not well enough. Not well enough.
Dr. Hatchett, before you get started, Mr. Chair, can you just make sure the board members wait until the presentation is
That's a good point.
asking any questions?
So I think that makes good sense. Everyone have agreed. Let's hear the presentation first, then we'll go.
Well, I want to express appreciation to the district staff for allowing me to be part of your effort for continuous improvement and helping children achieve at higher levels. I also want to express my appreciation to the staff for the candor and the willingness that they had to share both good information and information that happens to be more challenging for all of us. So I'm really appreciative of that. I want to start with the scope of the work. In order to take a look at the Department of Exceptional Children and also look at our implementation of our multi-tiered system of support, I conducted the following activities to gain information and glean insight into our programs. I had focus groups with elementary principals, then middle school principals, and high school principals. We had 6 different listening sessions with special education teachers. I had several focus group meetings with special education coordinators in the district. We met with the school climate coaches, the occupational and physical therapists, the speech language pathologist, the school psychologist, and district leadership and other departments such as human resources, finance, transportation, those other departments that impact pretty heavily on delivery of special education-related services. We had 6 different listening sessions with parents, which was a real eye-opener for me. We had some sessions that were so well attended that we scheduled a second session in that same geographic region. Other regions, we had very limited parent participation, so we saw a significant difference in the level of parent participation in our listening sessions. I also had opportunities to observe in special education classes and in general education classes. I reviewed selected documents related to special ed and multi-tiered system of supports, and then conducted surveys of special education teachers and MTSS literacy leads. Of the 367 special education teachers, 244 completed the survey, which is pretty phenomenal to have that kind of turnout. That tells me that people were very interested in sharing information about their status and their work. An overview of the Department of Exceptional Children. There are 5,000 students in this district who receive specialized instruction designed to meet their unique needs through an individualized education program. In special ed, we really like to talk in letters, so we talk about children have IEPs. In order to provide services for those students, we have, I think, a fairly small staff, especially when you consider the types of disabilities that the department is responsible and that schools are responsible for serving. We serve children with speech-language impairments, students with specific learning disabilities in reading, writing, and written expression. That includes children with dyslexia. We serve children with intellectual disabilities ranging from mild to moderate to severe, those students that are nonverbal and non-ambulatory. We serve students with hearing impairments, including those students who are deaf and who require total or manual communication in order to be effective communicators. We have children with visual impairments who also require Braille instruction and who require orientation and mobility instruction in order to be able to negotiate a building or to cross the street in our district. We have an obligation to teach those kinds of things. We serve children with autism, and autism is dramatically increasing in terms of the numbers. We also serve children with orthopedic impairments like cerebral palsy, and students with other health impairments like seizure disorders and other kinds of disorders that limit their alertness and vitality. So you can see we have a wide variety of disabilities and challenges when it comes to serving children with special needs. And 5,000 is a tremendous number to be supported by the staff that you see on the screen. One assistant executive director who is leaving us, I think you heard that earlier. We have 6 special education coordinators, but 3 of those are potentially leaving us, 2 for sure and 1 potentially. In a district this size, you would expect to see double that number of support staff in order to serve the schools and to meet the needs and challenges that they have. We have 367 special ed teachers, 190 paraprofessionals who support them, 47.8 speech-language pathologists, 17.8 occupational therapists, 3.8 physical therapists, 4 special education therapists, 2 interpreters for the deaf, 1 audiologist, 1 orientation and mobility instructor, and 36.8 school psychologists. So while that looks like a very large staff, when you look at supporting 5,000 students and 5,000 families, with the kinds of challenges that I just mentioned with the varied disabilities, it's a very small staff to try to provide the support that they need. I'm going to share with you just very briefly highlights of some of the recommendations that I will be making. I will be delivering a report to the administration by the end of this month that will have quite a number of charts and findings and recommendations. But today I just want to hit the highlights and share with you briefly maybe some of the reasons for the recommendations that I'm making. I'm recommending that we establish a structure for providing information to and receiving information from special education teachers by establishing a special education teacher leadership team. And we need at least 3 for a district this size, and perhaps even more. We need to start building the leadership capacity of our special education teachers. We also need a structure and a vehicle for listening to them for sharing information with them, for helping them to be part of the problem-solving team in dealing with some of the challenges that we're dealing with. They express concerns over high caseloads, even though our caseloads in this district are compared very favorably with other school districts, and in no case did I find us to be out of compliance with the number of students served. But they do have issues with being able to collaborate with other teachers, especially with general education teachers, so that we can be sure we're all on the same page. They feel like that it takes a long time to get response when they have issues from the district. When they get a response, they like it, but the latency bothers them and it bothers the coordinators here who are trying to give the service. So they have a number of issues that we would like to involve them in helping us problem solve. We would like for them to choose their own chairperson, and then the administrator from special ed be the facilitator who would bring information from, take information to, and invite people to come and talk with them as they need assistance. So I think building that capacity, having that structure for teachers to have a voice in what happens in special ed will go a long way. Similarly, I'm recommending that we establish a parent advisory council that would be representative of the kinds of disabilities that I just mentioned. Parents were very eager to express concerns about issues and challenges that they're facing. They indicated that they don't really understand sometimes the IEP process or their role in the IEP process. They often feel intimidated by the IEP process. They feel like they often have to fight for the services and accommodations that they feel that their child needs. Sometimes they feel like it's an us against them, the parents against the district. And some parents even view the district as obstructionist, and that it attempts to do as little as possible to save and spend as little money as possible. Those are perceptions that a lot of parents have. They also express concerns sometimes about school level administration not being open or supportive and saying things like, we don't do that here, or that's not how we do it. So I think it's very important that we reach out to parents, that we involve parents, that we want them to be part of the solution. We want them to help us understand how we can better serve them and their children. We have to find ways to show that we respect them as their child's #1 advocate, and we have to be better listeners to parents. So we have some work to do there. And that's not unusual to find that in school districts, especially large school districts. We might need more than one parent advisory council. So, next, we're going to continue to provide training to special education teachers in the use of multisensory approaches, similar to those used by Orton and Gillingham, particularly effective with children with dyslexia. And that fits into the next 2 slides. Continue to provide training on teaching foundational literacy skills for general ed and special ed teacher, with focus on phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonological processing, phonics. We're currently developing an instructional framework for special education teachers that would be research-driven and evidence-based. We have a number of programs that are being used across the district. We probably have too many programs being used. What we would like to do is to try to begin to whittle that number of programs down to our selecting and helping teachers with us select the very best programs that can give us the best results.
And we've done some of that.
And I know it's been reduced from from about 50-something down to, we may be working closer to 12 that are most frequently used. And we have some, I'll call them hangers-on, some programs that have been around that some people still like and have had a little bit of trouble giving them up. But that instructional framework is incredibly important in that we use research-based materials. And okay. Teachers express the need to have a dedicated planning period. Some teachers do not have a planning period. And in some cases, they've done it to themselves because it was the only time a child's schedule would fit with their schedule. And so they would give up their planning period to serve a child. But every teacher should have a planning period so that they can provide more effective instruction. And teachers who are co-teaching general education and special ed teachers, it would be great if they could have a common planning period. A lot of people indicate, I don't know special ed, I'm not special ed trained, and we hear that sometimes from coaches and administrators. And what we would like to do is provide some additional training so that there would be classroom walkthroughs, guidance for administrators to look at and look for when they go into special education classrooms, so that we're holding them as accountable as we're holding other classes. Appropriate use of adaptive digital content, as you've heard previously, what a fantastic way to personalize learning and instruct children on their level. But we have to make sure that we're not just using that to keep somebody busy. We want to make sure that teachers know the purpose, that they know how frequently they should be doing it, and we want to make sure they take advantages of the reports that are generated by those research-based adaptive content resources. We often have parents who demand a one-on-one or a shadow for their child and feel that's the only way they can get an appropriate education. So we have to make sure that we're making those decisions in as precise way as we can. So I'm recommending a decision tree for making those decisions about when and what service is needed and for what reason. In addition, develop a plan for independence at the same time that we're offering someone for the child to be more dependent on. We want to continue to expand opportunities for students with disabilities to be included in the general education classrooms and their home schools when appropriate. The State Department of Education issues an LEA profile, and we did not meet the state target for the number of students with disabilities who are served in the general education classroom at least 80% of their day. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to provide those opportunities for mainstreaming in least restrictive environments as much as possible. We also have an obligation to make sure that general education instruction is appropriate for the child as well. Some teachers, general ed teachers, said they do not have access to students' IEPs. I discovered they do have access, but they haven't been trained in how to get that access. So we definitely want them to know what the child's present levels are or what they're working on. As funding allows, we need to add additional district-level instructional support staff to provide more training, coaching, and to assist school teams in IEP development and implementation.
Get stuck.
There we go. Multiple clicks. It has a little bit of a disability built in. I just have to be patient and work with it. Our LEA representatives, our school-level administrators who participate and supposedly lead IEP team meetings, expressed a need for additional training about the law, requirements of the law, and more training in the process of how to run and lead an IEP team meeting. So we definitely need some additional training there. More collaboration between Department of Exceptional Children, Human Resources, and school administration regarding recruitment, qualifications, allocations, postings, and selection of personnel. That process tends to be cumbersome because so many people have a hand in that process, and timelines can sometimes pose some difficulties for us as well. So we'd like to find a way to streamline that process and make sure that we're all working in a way that we can fill positions in a timely manner. OTs and PTs feel that they are not being paid salaries that are competitive with neighboring school districts and clinical settings. In fact, we're likely going to lose 2 occupational therapists to a clinical setting. That's a service that children must have if the IEP team says it's required in order for them to benefit from their IEP. If we had to pay for those services in a clinical setting or a hospital setting, we'd pay $150 an hour. So we want to make sure that we're competitive with neighboring districts and that we don't lose those people because we aren't paying them a competitive salary. Special education transportation was an issue for some parents because they felt like the time between an IEP team saying the child needs transportation and the actual provision of the transportation was too long. We've worked very closely with the transportation office and think we have some solutions to make that a more timely service that can come about. I think you may have heard something about the literacy acceleration team. That's been my focus with the MTSS review. you have an outstanding MTSS plan, calendar, process, an assessment entrance, or instrument. The issue has been consistent implementation of that plan across the district and across the regions. I've been observing in classrooms as well as looking at and interviewing people in certain positions, and we have a significant amount of inconsistency in the implementation of directives that come from the central office. And I think that has resulted somewhat in some inequities that exist in terms of program offerings and services. With the Literacy Acceleration Team, what we're focusing on primarily there is with those students scoring below the 25th percentile who are not receiving interventions outside what the general education classroom is doing through differentiated instruction. So we're looking at setting aside a specific dedicated period when we would attempt to group students according to their instructional levels and use research-based, evidence-driven programs during that period, which would be above and beyond the language arts period. We're recommending starting that in those schools that have been targeted for support because of low-performing test scores and other situations. So with that, we think that will actually lead to probably fewer students being evaluated for special education. We have coming on board, I think, an excellent universal screening instrument that will give us lots of information. It comes filled with dyslexia markers, which I think will help general education and special education identify those kinds of kids early on so we can give them the supports that they need. That's a brief overview of the major recommendations that I'll be making. I'll be glad to interview or address any questions that you might have. I shouldn't say interview you, but I'm in the process of interviewing people.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So which areas participated and which ones were less participatory?
The Peninsula schools, we were disappointed with the participation there. The Mount Pleasant schools, we had to schedule additional listening sessions.
Okay. And is there any way
And
to
North Charleston was sort of in between.
And we've tried everything we can to get
I won't say we've tried everything here, but we did.
It wasn't a one and done.
No.
Any other questions?
I just got a quick question. Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. I was just wondering, of the 5,000, there were two quick questions. One is you seemed to say something contradictory at the start. You said that employees complained about high caseload, but just before that you'd said that the staff was not big for 5,000 students. So you said, yeah, they complained of high caseloads, but really that wasn't the case. It's sort of normal. So I'm sure they don't contradict. Help me understand that.
We don't have enough staff at the district level to provide the level of support that teachers really need.
Okay,
so
got it.
We aren't as well staffed there as most districts this size are. When I look at the actual caseloads,
To give support to the resource
right.
teacher at the, okay.
Yeah, yes. When I look at the actual numbers of students on teachers' caseloads, we look really good there. For
Okay.
example, you might only have 15 students on a caseload, and another district that same caseload might have 26 students on it.
Okay, and so with the 5,000 students, you think with some of the early identification, you'll be able to whittle out some of those who have been labeled? Is that essentially?
I would be hopeful of that, but I will say that your incidence is probably one of the lowest in the state in terms of the percentage of your population identified as special education students. So you're already low in terms of that. There are districts in the state that identify 25% of their population as a student with a disability. I'm sure that's over-identification. So I think you may reduce it some, but I don't think it'll be reduced significantly.
Okay, got it.
So, because what we need to do is get clear on what it should look like. We have 678.2 positions, according to you, on the staff. And you said, A, that's not enough, that we also need a, you said more at the district level. and I'm getting to that. The district level instructional support staff, add additional district level support staff. And then you said that while there's a great program, you were saying this under the literacy acceleration, that it wasn't being done. That the program exists, the process exists, the rules exist, it's not being done. So is that a function, we'll go back up the ladder, is that a function of not having enough staff? Who's responsible for the people not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
I'd like to start, and then I'd ask Dr. Hatchett to
Sure.
jump in. One of the things we've tried to put into place for next year that we've worked really hard, you've heard about Learning Services and its reorganization efforts. We want to think about how do we support schools in taking work to scale. So we're building out that district-based coaching. We're also trying to build out school-based coaching, bringing those coaches in with their principal during the principal meeting and bringing them in a second time. And the coaches that we do currently have already come in, but we're going to be looking at how do we work from the special education arena, the general education arena, how do we get in there together and support those schools. So that's one thing. The second thing is we did get some increased funding in IDEA, and we were able to add 3 instructional special education positions that can help our teachers. For example, when we've got all the dyslexia work that we're doing, you've seen the dyslexia plan, and you'll be seeing that again in the upcoming months. We've got to think about how do you take it from that paper, from the conceptual level, to support teachers in actually doing it. And to do that, it takes coaching. It takes a written curriculum. You've got to understand what your decision trees are for making decisions about who gets interventions. You need the assessment. And then you have to step in there and help teachers as they make that shift. So we're putting those structures in place. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think you answered the question.
So are you saying that you didn't have enough
I'm saying
coaches who don't work with the students, and that's why the teachers who worked with the students weren't following the plan?
I'm saying one, we're lean. We do operate lean. I mean, that's just a fact. We're lean.
We're going to get back to
district
that. I'm
staff.
trying to figure out what
Correct.
solves the lack of fidelity in execution.
I think
Those were his
the
words.
coaching.
So there's
The
not
fact
enough
that we did not
watching.
have, yes, those coordinators deal so much with compliance. You see the
Got
state
it.
level complaints. You see the ones that make their way to the federal level. They deal with complaints, they deal with IP meetings, but we now will have individuals that are designated for instructional programming in special education.
So you're saying compliance takes up so much of their time?
Yes.
I am.
Yes.
Okay.
And Madeline Jacobs actually designed, she actually designed the job description and brought forward that it was a need. She's worked hand in hand with Dr. Hatchett this year, and really, we will have a blueprint. His report will provide us with a blueprint for going forward.
So then going backwards from my 3 questions, you've got add additional district level instructional support staff to train, coach, and assist. That is the same as the last bullet point. That will solve the problem on the last bullet point, or is that another team to coach?
Yeah, go ahead.
Those instructional specialists will be trained specifically in special education, working with some of those
Right.
cases I mentioned, which are very specific kinds of things. They won't be as much of a generalist as the other coaches that have been talked about here. But good reading instruction is good reading instruction.
Okay,
And
so
people-
this transcends out of special ed
Yes.
just to literacy acceleration. So that's one team.
Yes.
Then the second additional team is the district level instructional support staff for the IEP intervention students. So then, to help us know what to expect, what do you think is is 678 half as many as we should have? 75% of what we should have? Or 678 enough people, but they're not in the right roles? So give us something to be able to understand what it should look like.
I think adding additional special education coordinators, I would probably recommend adding at least 3 of those. Because of the size of the district, and because of the needs that are out there, and because of some of the things that we need to fix. We have inequities, we have inconsistencies that have appeared over a long period of time that need to be addressed for special needs kids, as well as some other kids that you've discussed today. So I think at least 3 additional coordinators. I like the idea of adding additional instructional specialists who can coach just in the special education arena initially. I'd probably add at least 2 more of those. And I would probably stop at that point and make sure that people are doing what they need to do. That I would revisit the job descriptions of all the coordinators. Because you lost half of your coordinators with the budget crunch, the job descriptions of what people do day to day doesn't look anything like what their job description says they do, because they've had to take up and fill in other responsibilities and duties. So I think all that needs to be reassessed as we add additional staff.
So if I'm hearing you, I'm thinking we need around 690 to 700, and that gets us started to do the right analysis, but we're not looking at needing 150 new employees.
No.
Okay. So just so we can get a feel for what we have, what's coming down the pipe. And I was a little bit concerned about the fact that they don't have planning periods. What percentage of our teachers' period don't have planning periods? I thought that was kind of built into the day.
Our elementary teachers do not have a planning period every day. That was a concern that was raised by members of the teacher cabinet, and something we'll be looking at going forward. Is there are days when elementary school teachers do not get a break period to even go to the restroom. I mean, they have students just about every minute of the day, and they may have planning 3 days a week or 4 days a week, but they don't necessarily get it every day. They don't have an unencumbered lunch period. They're on recess duty. The elementary day is quite demanding. And then you may have a special education teacher that again has volunteered to pick up students because that's the best time to serve them without them missing other important
Can we
content.
address that? Or, I mean, within the budget we passed for 18-19, is there any changes to this? Or are we locked into a budget that hasn't addressed this?
You have to hire more staff because the kids have to do the song.
Right, I agree with that, but
So Mrs. Ambrose is developing the program of studies. If we can implement the program of studies, we can address it. The program of studies will increase the learning opportunities for kids at the elementary level, and then that frees up regular classroom teachers for planning. But to be frank with you, in order to do that, you have to have about 500 to 600 students in every school.
Right.
That's the solution. You cannot both have very small schools and staffing ratios that provide programmatic options that all kids deserve and that treat teachers fairly.
okay. And the concern about the occupational and physical therapist salaries, because you're right, they can compete on a clinical private factor. Are they addressed in the COLA 2% and increase in the salary structure that we've approved, or were they left out of all that?
They're addressed as you have suggested, but they're not addressed in the way that they need to be addressed. We're losing personnel to Colleton County because Colleton County pays more than we do. So in this year's budget, we had hard choices to make, and we made some tough choices. So at this point, they're not being addressed, but one of the things that we will look at, we'll bring back a report to you in July as a result of Dr. Hatch's recommendations. One of the things we'll have to look at is how much are we outsourcing at $150 an hour versus what we could do with that money to employ our own teachers.
So they did get the 3 sets of raises, but that still doesn't make them whole to their peers or to clinical settings.
In order to be made whole, they have to be moved to a different category on the salary schedule.
Thank you. Thank you.
They're one of the few groups of people, professionals, who have an advanced degree and who instruct children directly every day but don't have a teaching certificate. So that's caused them over time to be placed on a different salary schedule other than based on a teacher's salary schedule. And they're really the only group that falls into that category.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question. My question is about Dr. Hatchett. Thank you for your presentation. My question is more so for Cindy and distributed and us. Looking on, I can't remember what page it is, but I think it's page 6 or 7. They talk about the recommended based on findings and identified needs. I've been extremely concerned about, and this has nothing to do with special needs students or anything, but this has to do with it says bullet point 4 is continue to provide training on teaching fundamental literacy skills for teachers to focus on phonics. So my question to Cindy and Jarita is, where are we with that premise when it comes to students who we could potentially either identify or know that they speak Gullah Geechee? Because if we're going to look at fundamental literacy skills as the template or the baseline for academic and student achievement, Dr. Hatch, I don't know if you're aware of the Gullah Geechee presence here in Charleston County, and the fact that a lot of our students speak a form of that in our classroom settings. And so my question is, I know it has not been identified as a disorder, and I'm not saying that it is, but I do think it's a need, it's an area where I think we need to address it, and we haven't. I mean, we've had a couple meetings, we had somebody come and talk to us about it. But
We train 200 teachers.
right, and so the question is, are we going to continue that? And if we are, what does that look like moving forward?
We did have training all throughout the year, and the consultant just recently wrapped up our final training session. She'll be meeting with the leadership team in learning services, but we are thinking about what do we do for all students to make sure that they can hear those sounds, the phonics, the phonemic awareness, and they can map them to letters. So we are continuing to do that work, and we are continuing to work with Gullah Geechee.
Good, I appreciate it. Can we just get an update as we continue to move forward with that? I think that's very important.
Those foundational reading skills are important for a student no matter what language they speak, because we're trying to help them hear the sounds and the English words that we're asking them to read and to be able to decode. So helping them map the letters to the sounds, match the letters and the sounds together, and help them blend those sounds together, and then eventually decode the entire word is beneficial to any student no matter what language they speak.
Dr. Hatchett, thank you so much for your presentation. All of my questions have been already asked, but I guess this question is directed to Cindy. How soon can we implement these recommendations? And I ask this question simply because, again, I said it before and I say it now. We can't always look at not having enough dollars or being mean on providing services to our kids, and specifically when we have dug deep into the needs for our special needs area and how we can, make sure that we're servicing the kids completely. So how soon or how can we get these recommendations looked at to be implemented so that, or much to the fact that we can get some of this started at least by August?
So we've already started on some of these. Dr. Hatchett would debrief with us periodically throughout the year. For example, we have a plan for dyslexia that's well underway.
Will that be implemented in the 18-19 school year?
Yes, it will. We have started the work on the Teacher and Parent Advisory Council. We've been analyzing adaptive digital content. The reports that Dr. Postaway shared with you previously comes out of one of those content providers, Achieve 3000. Okay. Principals are coming in now and meeting with their level leader. The superintendent's often in those. I'm in many of those or most of those. And we're reviewing data. So we're looking for patterns and trends with the elementary, middle, and high feeder patterns. Thinking about what supports we need, how frequently we need to be there on site to offer support. We rolled out school-based coaching. Michelle English Watson, who I should have mentioned, would be with us today at the table. She's been key to all of this work, but she's actually in another city, in another state, looking at how to measure skills and dispositions on top of academic content. So I say all that to say many of these things we've already started on. The instructional team will be working through the summer. Miss Emily Woody will be working with those new staff members that are joining the instructional team. We'll be thinking about what are the training areas that we want to make sure our district-based and school-based coaches get, building out a matrix, and then we'll hit the ground running.
Can we, and I know you didn't cover all of the areas, but I would highly recommend that as we begin early budget preparation for next cycle, that these are put at the front of the table so that we can capture them, and these recommendations stays in front of us so that we can make sure that they improve.
I will do that, thank you. Great suggestion.
One other thing about what's been done, administrators express the need for additional training. They want to know more about the law. They want to know where the pitfalls are. They don't want level 1 complaints or Office for Civil Rights complaints or due process hearings. So the district did bring in Julie Weatherly, who's a nationally known attorney in special education law, and did a day's training. We got really good feedback from administrators on that training and hope to piggyback on some of that as well. I will say, as I've shared information along the way, the staff has been incredibly receptive to the recommendations. We mentioned OTs and PTs looking at their salaries. I didn't mention looking at school psychologists' salaries because along the way, I did that early on. Dr. Postlewaite came and sat in on one of those sessions, and in this year's budget, you corrected the situation where we had 7 vacancies last year in school psychology. We had kids waiting for evaluations. It looks as if we're going to start the year with all those vacancies filled.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
So some of these, like continue to develop the emerging instructional framework, that's creating a program, or I mean, that's not hiring and stuff. So is that going to be done by the end of this summer so it can be used?
It's well underway.
Okay. And the decision tree for one-to-one adult service, can that be completed before we start the next school year?
Yes, I think that Madeline's plan is to make that part of the reevaluation process, and she's already begun working on that.
Thank you.
As I leave to go back through this, I would just thank again the staff who've worked in special education this year. It is a tremendous challenge. We don't think about the fact that they have more students in their special education division in Charleston than 40 school districts have in South Carolina. So their divisions are bigger than 40 of the school districts that operate with a superintendent, a board, and a full staff, and do full-time work for fewer students than they have to support in special education. So they've really done yeoman's job, and I appreciate all of their work and yours, Dr. Hatcher.
Yeah.
Thank you, this is great work.
Looking forward to hearing this.
All right, so that's at the end of SEC?
And this?